ado, let me introduce Dennis Cowan.
Thank you. I kind of feel I'm in my second home. I married a Lake Orion girl. I married one of Debbie's younger sisters. Is that a polite way to do that? Okay, so I'm still going to get a Christmas gift, Debbie. Thanks. Okay. But spent a lot of time. Debbie's mom and dad, my in-laws, lived right next to the public access off of Indianwood, and spent many years in the bay, swimming and boating over the lake, and had a lot of fun. So it's good to be back here. First, I want to make one thing clear to all of you. I'm not employed by the RTA. I don't represent the RTA, except as a spokesman. I don't work for them. I'm here as a private citizen to urge you to vote yes and to approve the RTA millage, which is on our November 8th ballot. It's a little down ballot, so you're going to have to find it. But it's an important issue, and I believe that every millage issue deserves scrutiny and deserves review and a full and thoughtful consideration. I learned that when I was mayor of Royal Oak. I was privileged to be the mayor there for 8 years and on the city council for 6 years before that. I'm also privileged to be the president and CEO of Plunkett Cooney, which we have 275 employees in 12 offices. 9 of them are in Michigan. 3 are in southeastern Michigan and are in the district, the 4-county area that is subject to the millage. And we also have 4 outstate offices, including Chicago, Columbus, Ohio. And by the way, that's a cult down there. You can talk everything until you get to football, and then it gets kind of funky, even with people that I know. Also in Indianapolis. So I wear a lot of different hats, both as a business person and somebody who signs a lot of paychecks, and also, as has been referenced, the former head of the Republican Party here in Oakland County. So why regional transit and why now? First of all, we are a region without regional transportation. It's been disconnected, disjointed, we've been underserved, and today in 2016, if you take a bus down Woodward and you get to 8 Mile, you have to go to the state fairgrounds and transfer buses. I find that inconceivable in a modern era. My interest in public transportation was 2 things. One, I went to Boston for college. I lived in Cambridge, North Cambridge, and took an electric bus every day for 12 minutes down to Harvard Square and then caught the Red Line. I once calculated I spent 4 complete months of my life on the Red Line going to UMass Boston. And if any of you have been to Boston, it's where the presidential library is for President Kennedy. So that gave me a lot of experience in public transportation as a user. Came back here, and my wife and I both worked downtown, so we were able to use the commuter train that came from Pontiac all the way to just to the east side of the RenCen. But after a couple of years, that kind of shut down. So when I became mayor, as you know, in the early 90s, we were becoming a pretty good and well-known and attractive and thriving entertainment center and restaurants. So I went to the Royal Oak Restaurant Association shortly after I got elected, and I said, you know, what keeps you up at night? What can we do to help all of you? And resoundingly, all the restaurant owners said, can you do something about public transportation? We can't get our workers to work. And these were mostly the lower income, lower wage employees who work in the kitchens, who are the waitresses and the waiters and people like that. Funny story, about 3 weeks ago, I saw the president of the current configuration of the Royal Oak Restaurant situation. And I said, what's your biggest headache? She says, can you please do something about public transportation? We need to get the workers to work. So over a 23-year period, the same problem persists. And Royal Oak is just a microcosm of that. It exists, as you know from the story of James Robertson, having to walk 23 miles to get to work because the bus didn't go where he needed to go. So this system, that's one story, and there's many stories like that. So we are the only major transportation, or only major region in the United States that does not have a regional transportation system. We've let it deteriorate. with a little bit of research, you can easily find out. In the late 40s, we had the equivalent of 390 miles of what today would be called light rail and streetcar.
Yep.
I can't wait to take my mom and my mother-in-law on M1 when it opens next year. I think they haven't been on a streetcar since 1955, I think, was when the system went down. So we were at one time a leader in public transportation. But our investment has lagged behind, and it's lagged behind significantly. And we have people, some in this room, like Mike Gingell, along with Brooks Patterson, and my good friend Matt Gibb, who's in charge of economic development, who are working very hard in putting resources to create and retain jobs in Oakland County, to create and maintain a first-class economy. But we have a second or third-rate transportation system. And why is this important? A survey of 500 corporate executives found that better transit and walkability was a universal factor that attracted them where they would put their business. A survey of 350 CEOs ranked transit at the top of qualities that matter to them and to their employees. And Crane's Business did a survey, 73% of the millennials, including my daughter, your niece, who's 24, works for Audi in Auburn Hills. 73% of the millennials put regional transit and transit options at the top of their list on where they want to live and where they want to work. So in order to keep our kids here and to retain and attract talent, it's kind of a business imperative that we have an improved transportation system. So what is this system going to do that's different? First of all, it's based on bus rapid transit, which means at the peak hours when people need to get to work and home from work, they're going to be running buses on a line like Woodward 5 an hour, where today we might have 1.5 or 2 an hour. So it's going to be much more frequent, much more opportunity for people to get to where they need to go faster. There'll be, as I said, the more frequent stops. And about one of the sad facts about our transportation system today is that 90% of the jobs in our region cannot be reached within 60 minutes. That's a very inefficient system that can't get workers to work when they need to be there at that time. So I brought, and by the way, I'm going to save all the facts and figures because I could bore you to death. I refer you to the plan. The plan's on the website, RTA Michigan. It's very extensive. It's very detailed. I was on both what they call the Stakeholders Committee and the Finance Committee. By the way, I don't have all the answers, so if I don't have an answer tonight that you may ask of a question, I apologize. But I will tell you this is one of the most thorough reviews financially I've ever seen. Every assumption, every projection is backed up by numbers from federal, state, county, or local sources. So this is the cornerstone to the system will be with this system, and what I like about it, it's moving the most people that it can in the key areas. It's not a politically correct system. It doesn't run, as we know, it is not running a line through every community in Oakland County, because in some instances it might be a bus to nowhere. So they're not doing that. They're trying to take the money that will be the funds that will be approved by the voters and put it to the most good in the heaviest demographic and populated areas. So with bus rapid transit, it'll be coming from Mount Clemens, down Gratiot, Woodward, and then from the south along Michigan Avenue. So that's one aspect of it. So it's going to be really on the main routes in and out of Detroit and through the county. Now that's just the north-south. Can you go flip to the next one, please? Okay. So, and this is where basically where the stops are. There'll be about every mile along the way. So the most important one for those here is we'll start in downtown Pontiac and run all the way down, and there'll be different park and ride stops, park and ride opportunities, both in Pontiac and in other areas along the way. Go ahead. So with the bus rapid transit, the highlight is you get 10-minute peak period service. The service hours are being extended. We also are going to have the regional rail. That is not new rail. There's not a big, massive public works construction to build new rail. It's using the current rail that we have, such as along that comes from Pontiac down all the way to downtown Detroit. So there'll be more trips per day, and that'll be to augment the bus rapid transit, which I might add, I was just in Cleveland for the Republican National Convention. It was a very effective way. If you talk to the locals, they really like bus rapid transit. And it's also very flexible since it's not on a fixed line. In the future, if the county decides or the RTA decides to make a change in routes, it can be done very efficiently with bus rapid transit as opposed to a fixed line light rail system. Can you flip back to the cross-county? This is really a key issue because we do not have today the cross-county connectors. So you're going to see on several of the mile roads cross-county connectors between Macomb and Oakland, and then also from on different spots other than the main routes that will come from Oakland County down to Wayne County, and Wayne County out to Macomb and out to Oakland. Go ahead. And then there's also commuter express routes that are run on some of the expressways. Go ahead. And this is a big gap that we have. We do not have, we have a beautiful airport. Once was an embarrassment, ranked 36th out of 36 airports national. And I'm glad the Wayne County Airport Authority and political leadership in the region decided to do something about it. But if you leave and you're visiting, you only have two options if you don't have a car. You can use Uber, go wherever you want, or you could use a Metro card about $50 to $75 to get one way. You can't get to the main metropolitan centers from the airport with public transportation, which it's the way it is whether you go to Denver or Boston, you get off the airport, you're at Logan Airport, you go on the Blue Line. I mean, you get right into downtown like in 10 minutes. So the point is, in all the other places we go travel to, they have public transportation from the airport to the main transportation centers, but not here. So but this will be remedied. And in Oakland County, it will go to Southfield, Troy, and Novi, to and from. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question for you?
Yeah.
In this detailed linkage that you told us about, are the anticipated rates for like downtown Detroit in there? Now, how would the rates compare?
The fare rates right now, no, they have not, the rates have not been established. The rates generally on a bus today are up to $1.50 and $2. I assume it'll be a little bit more from the airport, but it's not going to be $50. I guarantee that.
We're going to have question and answer at the
Yeah,
end, so
okay.
if you hold your questions, please.
One of the key issues that affect every community, including the northern communities here in Oakland County, where there'll be an improvement, is accessibility and mobility for seniors and for the disabled community. This was an important issue for Brooks Patterson. Brooks had changes made in the cross-county routes, lessen those, so he could improve, particularly in the northern part of the county, the accessibility and mobility. This is more if you can see in the lower picture, this will be more door-to-door, on-demand service. So if you have, like my mom's 82, she lives at 18 in Point. Fortunately, where she lives has a system where if it's within 7 miles of a doctor's appointment, they'll take you. But she's got one doctor who's 10 miles. Now she'll be able to call RTA, set up a door-to-door trip, and be both dropped off and picked up. So that will be, I think, a great thing for everybody, especially those who have either elderly parents or people with disabilities who need door-to-door service, and that's something that's been lacking. That service overall across the 4 counties would be improved 33%, so it would be a dramatic increase. So the rate is but the other thing is we're going to catch up with the 20th century and use computers and smartphones in order to buy tickets to the system, and it'll be coordinated system-wide, so you don't have to buy one ticket from DDOT and another ticket from SEMTA and another ticket for RTA. It'll be one pass that you can use. Go ahead. So what's in it for Oakland County? I'm not going to read all this, but these are all not just service improvements, but new service that will occur with the bus rapid transit, both on the cross-county connector routes and the new local service. If you want to go to the next, and then also the commuter service, which will be the express, so you don't have to stop if you don't want to. And then also the airport express, and then what's not on that is what I just mentioned about the mobility and accessibility for the disabled and for seniors. So it is, the millage rate is 1.2 mils for 20 years. This is a pay-as-you-go system. This is not a system that's going to incur massive debt or anything of that nature. That's why the rollout, and if you go to the plan, not every service is going to be available immediately, because they're going to take the money that they have, buy the buses, operate the system, and each year build it up a little bit more. It is not going to be putting taxpayers and the RTA into massive debt. It's going to be a pay-as-you-go system. I think about roughly 1.3% is for debt. The rest of it is all for operations every year. That will average about $96 a year for the average household, which is about $8 a month. It does have what I call a taxpayer protection clause, in that there's no increase, renewal, or redirection of funds without a vote. So why vote for the RTA? First, in the law, 85% of all dollars raised in Oakland County have to be used here in Oakland County. The governance is shared governance. Everybody has a seat at the table, and that is a proven system of cooperation we've seen with Cobo Hall, the Great Lakes Water Authority, and in the Grand Bargain and saving the Detroit Institute of Arts. So I think that the benefits that will come, that have been proven, is that in every city where there's been $1 of public transportation investment, there's been $4 of corresponding economic private investment. I think we've seen that in Cleveland most recently. I think this is a proposal that's worthy of your consideration, and I would urge you to vote yes on this proposal.
Thank you. Yes, we'll do question and answers after you've heard both sides, so that we can know what we're talking about. Mike Gingell is going to come up and talk. He's got the slight advantage being in his own home court. Being married into Lake Orion doesn't really work.
I was going to hold out and give that to him in a minute, but thank you. You know, it's always difficult when you get up and you talk about an issue and you're on the negative side of things, right? Because automatically people jump to conclusions that you're negative about the topic, that you have no interest in the topic. And I think I can say for Brooks Patterson, for myself, for members of the county, I think people are interested in regional collaboration and potentially regional transportation, if it's good for Oakland County or if it's even neutral for Oakland County. Brooks has said that for years and years. So, you know, I was listening to Dennis, and I think he made a lot of great points. I was thinking about Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, DC. Who doesn't like to go to those places? I love to go to those places. I jump on the blue line, I run out, you know, have a good time. But it draws me back to a couple questions, and then I'll get into my points. But the question that I have is, who thinks $63,343,442 sounds like a lot of money? Okay? That's what Oakland County will be paying per year for 20 years on this millage. The other question I have is, you know, while we hear a lot about regional transportation systems, in all honesty, who's ever seen a regional transportation system that makes money or breaks even? I personally haven't.
There are none.
So, you know, the thing I would say, don't be fooled by fancy presentations. This is a complicated issue, and I'm going to urge you to do your homework at the end. Now, Dennis is a good friend. He supports me. We get along 99.99% of the time, and I respect Dennis. I have a lot of respect for Dennis. He's done a lot for the Republican Party. But I have another friend that's in Royal Oak who's on the Democratic side, and he chairs the Democratic caucus for the Board of Commissioners. And usually when we get in these kind of engagements, the conversation starts going really fast, a lot of facts thrown out. And my line to Dave Woodward is the same line I'm going to use to Dennis, that I'm just a simple kid from Lake Orion, and I can't keep up with all the silver-tongued devils from Royal Oak. So I got to slow this down a little bit. gotta slow this down a little bit and just talk about the facts as I see them and as I know them. So let me get into that. I'll start with a little bit of history about how we've gotten to the point of having this question on the ballot. Many of you know that most of the time when a tax question or a ballot question comes up, it requires the local body approval to put it on the ballot. When the zoo came to the Board of Commissioners, had to approve it. When the DIA came, the Board of Commissioners had to approve it. The RTA, the Board of Commissioners didn't have a say. That was all worked out with special interest groups as the statute was being written to give the authority members the ability to put the question on the ballot without the Board of Commissioners' involvement at all. And I'll also have to say that the ballot question is a popular vote. So the way it was written is if Wayne, Macomb, City of Detroit all pass it and Oakland votes against it, guess what? We're getting a regional transportation authority tax. So it's all driven by popular vote, and it's important that people do the research and turn out based on if they're for it or against it. A couple other things I want to mention is that when you get into the plan, and I think Dennis is right, not to get into all the nuts and the bolts because it's complicated, but when you get into the plan, you find out it's very complicated. And I think the group that was running the ballot question did not do a very good job in communicating. In fact, I'll be honest with you, not that it matters, but I am the chairman of the board of the Oakland County Commissioners. We spend $850 million a year of your tax money. I had 2 meetings around the RTA in probably the last 2 years. And one of them is because I started talking to people saying, I don't even know what this is about. No one's talked to me. I haven't heard a word about it. So puts you in a little precarious situation when you're trying to figure out, do you support it or not? And as I mentioned, it's a fairly complicated plan. There's a lot of financial models in the plan that talks about the revenue and the funding. And those models all have a lot of assumptions in them. And do we have accountants in the room, financial people? I know Mary Ann and others. The first thing that you do when you look at a number is you look at the model and you look at the assumptions. I would urge you to look at the models and look at the assumptions, because that leads myself and I know others in Oakland County to ask really 3 questions. What do the residents of Oakland County get for the 1.2 mills, the $63,343,442 a year that we're going to provide to the RTA? That's a fair question. What do we get? What's our ROI? Well, when you look at Oakland County in total, I'll be honest, the RTA plan will be pretty good for the southeast part of Oakland County. I do think they'll get quite a bit of benefit in running into the city of Detroit. The problem is when you look at Oakland County, it's so sparse, as Lynn Getz mentioned, the northern communities really don't get a lot, and they're going to pay the tax. And when you look at the northern half of Oakland County, the return on investment is roughly 10 to 13% from the math that I've done. When you look at the city of Detroit, return on investment is 371%. Okay? That's why you got to do your homework on complicated plans. The other question we'd ask, or I'd ask, is so when do we get the benefit? If the millage pass begins collecting December 1st, 2016, Dennis talked about the east-west corridors. The main corridors are going to be bus routes through Oakland County, which I think will be good. But we won't see those bus routes until 2022, at least 6 years. So we'll begin paying, but the benefit will lag for some period of time. The other question I have is, what kind of guarantees will Oakland County get? We're going to be funding 40% of the system. Okay, when you look at Oakland County based on the SCV, Oakland County is going to be funding 40%. So we're going to be paying the most. Okay, what are we going to get? When are we going to get it? And how can we be guaranteed that that money that we're paying is actually going to come back to Oakland County? And I said I wasn't going to talk about formulas, but I'm going to talk about really one. It's called the 85% rule. So the 85% rule was something, and Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Bob Dadow and Jared Poison and Brooks kind of brought up this issue of we'd like to keep at least 85% of the tax revenue generated in the place where it was generated from. We worked with the RTA to get that implemented, but here's which is a good thing. Here's the issue with the 85% rule. It comes back to models and assumptions. So the revenue models that are generated based off the SCV, that's one part of it. The second part of the model is talking about what can we anticipate for those taxes that won't be collected. And the same number was applied to all municipalities. So what we're saying is Oakland County is going to not collect the same amount of taxes as the city of Detroit. And when you do the research and look at the Oakland County's CAFR, which is their financial publication, it shows you that we don't collect about 0.5% of our taxes. Okay? City of Detroit, 30%. So when you start thinking about this model, and you start thinking about revenue, and you start thinking about where the fallouts and gaps could be, in my opinion, Headley rollback, probably going to get a Headley rollback, that's probably one. You look at the personal property tax and some changes in the laws that could be decreasing the personal property tax, which will affect the revenue model. And then you look at the tax revolving fund, which I mentioned, the inability to collect a certain amount of tax being appropriated equally across all municipalities. In my opinion, that's very likely to create a revenue shortfall in the financial model. This brings us back to the question of what guarantees is Oakland County going to get, and can we trust the city of Detroit and the members that will be voting to respect the agreement on the 85% rule when they're looking at a shortfall of revenue and they need assets to be going into the city. Because the city is going to be putting in rail, it already put in M1 rail, and the suburbs will be getting more buses. And when you look at the M1 rail, for instance, as a specific example, the information that I've been provided is that it costs roughly about $56 million a mile to build that M1 rail. For bus routes, it's on average about $5 to $10 million to put the assets in place to fund those routes. So an interesting thing in regards to the RTA is the M1 rail was created by a bunch of private investors, people that had a vested interest in moving people around the city of Detroit. It's not bad, it's great. I like to go to Detroit. I like to move around to Midtown, Porttown. But originally they said, you know what, we're going to fund it, and we're going to build it, and then we're going to operate it for 10 years at least before it's considered to be part of any other system. When the RTA came about, all of a sudden, the M1 rail started to come into the plan. And it's kind of curious that the M1 rail started to come into the plan. At the time, it's moving from development to operating, right? And back to the operating expense. An interesting note on that is that the M1 rail is anticipating that they're going to get 5 million riders a year as part of their revenue model. Another assumption. When you look at the people mover, which is mature, been around, people know what it is, it gets about roughly half of that in ridership per year. So I'm hoping the M1 rail does better. It certainly looks cool, looks awesome. But I think the biggest issue that I have, and I know others in Oakland County have, really it revolves around what's the return on investment the Oakland County residents get, right? When do we start seeing that investment come to fruition and assets deployed in Oakland County? And how do we ensure that we're guaranteed protection in this regional transportation authority where the money that we raise for the authority comes back and stays in Oakland County? And when the tough get going and there's issues and there's shortfalls and there comes votes and public hearings and public putting pressure on people to move the money, how do you know that you've got guarantees and a trustworthy relationship to make it happen? The answer is you don't. And in politics, a lot of times you don't. But if you have a good relationship and you have past history of that relationship, sticking to their word, operating in an effective manner, trying to be politically correct here, I would say you probably aren't as worried as much. So at the end of the day, I'm not against regional transportation. Okay? I like going to Chicago and jumping on the trains and going into the city, and it's fun. I'm against making sure that things don't occur in Oakland County that aren't good for Oakland County. And Dennis mentioned he's here as an individual, and again, I have great respect for him and what he's done. I'm here as an individual too, I'm a taxpayer, but at the end of the day, I'm here as an elected official working for the people, and I serve at your pleasure. So I've been doing the homework to just be able to come here and give you another side of the issue tonight. But at the end of the day, I would say, do your research for yourself. The plan is published. When you're researching it, look at the models, look at the assumptions, and ask yourself, does it make sense? That's really how you're going to make the most educated vote. Thank you.
All right, so let's open it up to questions from the floor. Know that we do have on TV here tonight, and they're filming this, so we need you to speak up so we can all hear your questions. Okay, let's start with Jim Rowe.
So we have Uber and Lyft and driverless cars maybe within the next 7 or 8 years. Why would we want to spend all this money when we could put that toward using those two methods of transportation, which I see as our next as rapid transit?
And that's a very good question.
Repeat the question so everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was with the onset of Uber and Lyft, the private sharing, ride sharing, and also autonomous and mobility vehicles, why would we want to make this investment? I believe, and the RTA believes, that that is part of the equation. What you have with Uber and Lyft, first of all, we have about 156,000 people a day in Oakland, I believe, coming in and out of Oakland County on bus rapid, hopefully on bus rapid transit. Do we want 156,000 people on Uber, Lyft, and autonomous vehicles? That would jam the roads. About 10% of your daily commutes are done on a bus today, and that will be improved with an improved system. So let me tell you how Uber and Lyft works. So if you've got about a 20-minute ride at peak hours, it's going to cost you about $17.50. So if somebody's going to work and they got to do a round trip on Uber or Lyft, it's going to cost them $35. Today, the bus will cost you $4. I think even the bus riders and anybody can figure out the economics aren't there. I will tell you an interesting thing with Uber and Lyft. In Florida, a couple communities are looking at giving part of the process will be for vouchers so that on short routes like 3 miles where there isn't a bus system, you can take an Uber or Lyft to the bus stop. And that, I think, will be a good way to do this. I'm not so sure that the autonomous vehicles are going to be the answer to everything. They say it's about 10 years out, really, and I think there's a lot of issues that will have to be resolved, but I think that'll be part of a system. But on the main routes and the long routes, the public transportation will still be the best option.
Mike, did you want to add?
I think Dennis is right. There's probably a place for Uber and Lyft. I guess I would say the difference is, as far as I know, those are companies that are trying to make a profit, so they're going to look at models that drive revenue and minimize costs.
Okay, Joanne?
When you showed the map of where the routes are going to go and all the cross connections, there was one over here in the corner that you never mentioned that I think is going to take up a lot of the money. And that's a rapid rail line between Ann Arbor and Detroit. And maybe it runs by way of Metro, I don't know. But, you know, my concern is how big a portion of this pie is that going to take to essentially serve a small segment. And my second question is, if the legislature, in its infinite wisdom, passed a thing establishing this RTA and letting this group of non-elected people put something on the board, can the legislature change it? And
Okay, first, I don't want to insult any of the legislators in the room, but they have been known to change legislation. I don't think there's any guarantee on that, but I think it would be irresponsible for any future legislature to change the rules, especially after the taxpayers have voted. So I would hope that that would be highly unlikely. With respect to the commuter rail from Ann Arbor into Detroit, that'll run off an existing line, and you should know is that the capital cost built into the budget for the RTA for commuter rail is approximately 2%. There's not a lot of improvements that need to be made to the current existing commuter rail. By the way, full transparency, you'll see in the study, the #1 place across all 4 counties that people wanted to get to by public transportation was the city of Ann Arbor. Now, if you're a U of M fan, I suppose that's really a great thing, but that happened to be the #1 place that people wanted to get to and from.
I'll just comment on Joanne's first question, or I guess the second question, but you know, if the tax is approved, it's a 20-year tax, which was enacted by the vote of the people, essentially. For it to be changed, I think it would have to work, the language would have to work through the legislature. To my knowledge, any tax that's driven by the vote of the people has to be repealed by the vote of the people. You've been in this business a long time, you know those things are tough to do. So My opinion is if the tax goes into place, it probably will remain in place.
Yeah.
The buses that I see running now in Birmingham and other places never have more than 1 or 2 people. And it's my understanding that the people mover loses 90 cents on every dollar that it spends to operate it. 9-0. I mean, it should just be shut down. It's a waste of time and a waste of money. When you talk about return on investment, the way you can get 100% return is not pass this and leave $63 million in our pockets.
Everyone's entitled to an opinion, and you should, you're entitled to yours, and I'm entitled to mine. I did know in anticipation that the people mover would come up. I have my own opinions on the people mover. I'm going to keep it to myself, but I think that's really, unfortunately, probably a little bit of a sideshow in all this. I think what's most important is getting people to work, getting them to their doctor's appointments. There's awful lot of people who don't have cars. And I don't know what your experience is here, but more and more people I talk to, the younger people are not having cars, or not even getting their license till they're 18, 19, 20. I mean, all of us in this room, I couldn't wait to get my license so I could get the heck out of the house. But that's not the case with the millennials and the generation following them. They're not going to be dependent, or don't want to be dependent, on traveling in an automobile. And I will give you a very good reason why. The enormous college debt that has hit this generation, the millennial generation, they probably can't afford to. They want to use the money to pay down the college debt instead of buying a car, so they're more reliant upon public transportation.
I just want to add 2 things. So you mentioned the buses in Birmingham, etc. Those are funded through a system called SMART, which we also pay a tax for. And that tax is going to remain on your tax bill until 2018, incrementally, right? At 2018, the Board of Commissioners will decide if we're going to put the ballot question back on for the vote of the people for the SMART buses. Now everything's more complicated than it seems, but communities are able to opt out of SMART and they get SMART credits. Those credits help us fund things like NODA, okay? So there are a lot of connections in the system that we have throughout northern Oakland County. So I think that's important to think about.
Barry? Yes.
I'm glad you brought NODA up. There are a few people in this room that worked long and hard to develop a special transportation system for folks with disabilities and workfare and senior citizens that would go across township lines. And as a matter of fact, it goes well beyond township lines. The difficulty that I have with RTA, and Michael, I agree with you that you have to look at all those models, and funding becomes an issue. So automatically, we'll have RTA. On top of that, we'll have SMART. And just in the past 2 years, we successfully were able to pass a millage in Orion, Oxford, and Addison Township to fund NODA. There's no possible way, and that comes up again, just a 4-year millage. So there's no possible way that folks are going to continue to fund 3 systems, all called transportation. I mean, you're talking $600–700 on some homes out here, and I'm not talking about $1 million homes. So that becomes a real problem. So the question, I understand now in the short term that we're okay, but and I appreciate your mom gets a ride that extra 1.5 miles, Dennis, to her doctor. But what about some folks up here in Addison back on a gravel road in an old farmhouse that rely on NODA for daily transportation to grocery shop and to do all the things, including maybe running into Rochester to Crittenden Hospital? NODA provides that service. So what service are we going to get up here in the sticks to provide for those folks?
My understanding, and I don't know every detail, but one of the reasons that Brooks held up this getting on the ballot was because he wanted improved service for disabled and seniors, in particular the northern communities of Oakland County. Now, how all the dollars work out, I don't know the exact, and I don't want to say something, but I do know that was a big issue, and that's why he put his foot down and wanted to ask for some changes, which RTA agreed with, and the board of RTA agreed with those changes. So I think that's one example, I hope, of the flexibility that the RTA and the board has, that if a county wants to do something within the money that they have, they'll be able to accomplish that. I don't know exactly if the 33% uptick in the service will replace NODA or supplement it. I don't have an answer.
Well,
But I'll get one.
I'll advise you that it won't replace NODA. We're running 17 buses now, and you can call and you can get a ride, short-term very quickly, daily, twice in a day, whatever it is that you choose. We used to have, up in Addison, for instance, SMART provided that senior transportation and handicap service. We had one bus. So that's my concern.
Let me just hit on that real quick too. So from a NODA perspective, my understanding is that the RTA is going to engage NODA and make it an extension of the RTA plan. And Larry, you know that I get a call from you on a regular basis about NODA, so it's always close to my heart. But we did have set up a meeting for some folks out here with the RTA leadership to put NODA on the radar, to make sure we had some discussion about what's going to happen to NODA. The concern I have isn't that the RTA is not going to try to work with NODA. The issue is going to be when that supplemental millage comes up and the voters turn the NODA-specific millage down, if they do, then what happens? That's an unknown. We can probably pontificate all night, but that's an item that we need to be aware of.
Okay, let's take a couple more questions. Lynn?
Okay, as a daughter of a UAW worker, but as the wife of a guy running for one of our Republican offices, we hope soon, and meeting all these business owners, how exactly is this going to benefit Chrysler, Ford, GM, especially GM, with their truck and bus, et cetera, in the Flint area, but also Chrysler, Jeep, et cetera, in this area? How is this going to impact them? Have you looked at that? And secondly, why would we want to go to Ann Arbor versus Lansing?
Yeah.
Why third, if I'm allowed? Why third? Are we, being that Oakland County has the per capita income, why is the hub focusing on Detroit versus Pontiac?
Well, first, let me cover one issue. Something that's very important, I think everyone should know, the M1 rail and the RTA were not matters that were advocated by politicians. They were advocated for by business leaders and business owners. M1 rail was mentioned. That was $125 million of private funding led by Roger Penske and Dan Gilbert, and I think they should be applauded. But stop and think about it. These are two pretty smart people. What did they see that maybe some of us didn't see? They recognize and have seen around the country the value of public transportation, and they were willing to put their money where their mouth is. This is not chump change. And along that line, every stop is immense buying and selling of property and economic activity. That's one of the reasons that they're doing that down in Detroit. But it's an example of additional transportation options. So I think it's important to know that the business leaders, both the Chamber and business leaders of Michigan, are supportive of this proposal. 2 weeks ago, the 4 CEOs of the 4 major health systems here in this region, who never agree on anything because they're vicious competitors, all agreed to support the RTA because of the difficulty they have of getting their employees to work and also of getting the patients to the hospital and for people to come for their doctor and surgeon appointments and things of that nature. So I think that those are people I think who see a bigger picture because they have to, but I think that they deserve at least the opportunity to have thoughtful consideration of their position and why they're advocating and why this has been a business-driven proposal and not a politician-driven proposal. You've seen very few politicians come out and say anything about this proposal up to this point, but you have had business leaders advocating, many of whom are Republicans, I might add.
I'm glad Dennis got to answer that question first because it gave me time to think a little bit. And I mentioned I'm a simple kid from Lake Orion, so he mentioned Roger Penske and Dan Gilbert. And let me start with, I do think it will have value to the business community, okay? But last time I checked, Roger Penske and Dan Gilbert were buying a lot of buildings in Detroit, creating a lot of businesses in Detroit, and probably going to profit from more people coming down to their businesses and buildings. So I do think it's important to recognize they stepped up and built the M1, and now they're going to operate it for 10 years, which they originally agreed to do. But I also think it's important to understand that I think business leaders see it as value to their business, but I can tell you my phone hasn't rung from Oakland County businesses, and I happened to call some folks in the executive office today and just say, do we have people beating the door down in the Oakland County Business Roundtable or other places about get behind RTA and support it? And in all honesty, there wasn't any reference to people doing that. So don't tell them to pick up the phones tomorrow.
You're going to get all kinds of calls.
But all things being equal, I mean, I applaud Roger Penske. He's done a lot of great things, and Dan Gilbert.
Okay,
But they own a lot of property down there too.
Let's take one more question. Teresa?
So, I'm not sure if I missed it. How is this going to be governed? Is there a body? Who's on it? How do they get on it? How do we hold them accountable for spending all that money? And
Mike probably knows as much about this.
Before you answer, I'm going to give you 1 second. How many of you have your smartphones? Remember last month I told you get your smartphones, take pictures of our speakers, put them out on Facebook, like and share, so this way they make sure people know that they were here today talking about this, and to get the cable program as well. So now, sorry.
The board is members from all 4 counties, who I think are appointed by the county executive, and in Washtenaw by the chief of the board of commissioners. And then there's a member that's appointed by the governor, which I think is currently Paul Hilligan, the former Speaker of the House. So it's a shared governance. It's the model that was used for Covewell Hall, which you remember used to have a lot of corruption, overspending, and a waste. And that model has worked very well. It's the model that was put in place basically for the same kind of shared governance model of the Great Lakes Water Authority. And it was also the cooperation of the counties that worked with the Grand Bargain. So I think from a voter perspective, I think that's probably a better model and a more proven model than if we had a lot of political appointees that were, and these are all mostly business people who are on, there's a couple former state representatives, but I think from what I understand in the safeguards that Brooks put in place, most recently before the matter was put on the ballot, that a lot of the financial determinations are going to require a 100% vote on many of the key matters. These are open meetings. These people will be held responsible not only by the voters, but by the people who appointed them. And I know that I think here we have Chuck Moss, former state representative, and Tim Sauve, who I think are 2 very responsible people, and I think will look out for the interest of Oakland County very well.
So I'll agree with Dennis, but I just want to give Brooks Patterson some credit. He's the one that fought for that type of model at COBO, the Regional Water Authority, and that's why we have it here. So it is a good model. It's worked so far. It's not perfect. There are votes that don't require 100%, where Oakland can be voting no, the others vote yes, and it goes through. But that's up to our representatives to be able to work with the other members of that board. At the end of the day, Brooks has done a good job, I think at best a job as he possibly could to protect Oakland County with the 85% guarantee and the board approach, and he really deserves a lot of credit for minimizing the potential impact that it could have should this pass. All right, you know what? I just want to take a minute and give my friend Dennis a round of applause. He came into hostile territory. He did a very good job presenting the facts, and he's a gentleman as always. So,
I have to say, you are very well served by Mike Ginjo being your county commissioner. I've seen Mike in action as the chairman. He really works very hard to bring both parties together. That's not always possible, and he does deal with us silver-tongued folks from Royal Oak.